So in an explosive new report, it has been discovered that a leaked email blows apart the BBC's impartiality claims over Gaza. Jonathan Sacerdote has reported in The Spectator that a leaked internal email from a BBC executive editor reveals that the corporation has issued prescriptive instructions to staff on how to cover the humanitarian situation in Gaza. The memo, titled, quote, "Covering the Food Crisis in Gaza," amounts to a top-down editorial diktat that discards impartiality, elevates one side of a deeply contested narrative, and imposes a specific anti-Israel legal political framing as settled fact. The existence of this email is a telling sign of how the corporation works to ensure its journalists stick to its own ideological angles. The email, which was sent to BBC staff on Friday, begins by declaring that, quote, "the argument over how much aid has crossed into Gaza is irrelevant." And instructs staff that, quote, "we should say the current distribution system, quote, doesn't work." It explicitly favours a particular explanation of suffering in Gaza, one that blames the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, the GHF, a relatively new aid body established with US and Israeli cooperation, while glossing over the role of Hamas, the rulers of Gaza, and a prescribed terrorist organisation under British law. But the quantity of aid entering Gaza is not irrelevant. If Hamas is hijacking, obstructing, or reselling aid, as Israeli and independent reports suggest, and as documented footage and testimony have supported, then the location, handling, and efficacy of aid delivery become vital indicators of where the problem lies. Blaming Israel alone for the humanitarian breakdown, while exonerating or ignoring Hamas, is not responsible or fair journalism, especially as Israel argues it's going to extreme lengths to try to mitigate the jihadi terrorist efforts to persecute and deprive Gazan citizens. The BBC's memo labels the GHF system a failure and instructs staff to say so. Yet the evidence is far from conclusive. Hunger and deprivation levels in Gaza remain unclear, with wildly varying estimates depending on source and political posture. The BBC, which declined to comment on the email, appears content to accept casualty figures and starvation claims from Hamas-linked bodies or sympathetic NGOs as definitive, while dismissing or omitting Israeli data and counterclaims. The email directs staff to reference mounting evidence of starvation and deaths around aid centres, yet makes no mention of Hamas operatives looting convoys, obstructing access, or even firing on civilians attempting to collect food, allegations which have been made publicly by Israel and backed at times by video and eyewitness testimony. Even the photographic evidence used by some UK newspapers has been limited and uncertain. Photos clearly taken in the same photo shoot by one photographer, linked to a far from impartial Turkish photo agency, shows an emaciated child, but tragic as that is, one child does not indicate a famine. Indeed, it has been speculated by some the child in question demonstrates visual signs of other pre-existing health conditions, which would potentially cause wasting and malnutrition. I think this has now been confirmed. It's backed up by the presence of other healthy and well-fed children appearing alongside him in the same photo set, apparently living in the same family home. Nor is the GHF model simply an improvised amateur system, as the memo suggests. On the contrary, it's a tightly managed military-grade distribution network designed to ensure aid reaches civilians directly and safely. Operated by vetted personnel with logistical oversight, GPS tracking, and on-the-ground medical and security staff, the GHF has reported a zero aid diversion rate. By contrast, the UN system the BBC nostalgically defends saw multiple convoys looted at gunpoint, with documented losses reaching 90% in some cases. It is therefore tendentious to assert that the older model did work, when in fact the BBC itself breathlessly reported widespread hunger under the very system well before the GHF system was in place. On 10th of February 2024, for example, the BBC's Lucy Williamson reported that in northern Gaza, children are going without food for days, and that some residents had resorted to grinding animal feed into flour to survive. Most egregious is the email's declaration that it's indisputable that Israel is the occupying power in Gaza, and therefore legally responsible for preventing hunger. This claim is presented without qualification, despite the fact that the status of Gaza under international law is disputed. Israel disengaged from Gaza in 2005, removing all settlers and military presence. It argues with some legal backing that it doesn't meet the criteria of occupation since it neither governs Gaza nor maintains a permanent presence. Even under post-October 7th operations, Israel maintains that its actions constitute military engagement, not sovereign control. International legal opinion may be divided. The BBC's own editorial guidelines insist that politically contested labels such as occupation should be attributed and contextualised, not asserted. That rule has been disregarded. The internal memo presumes a singular legal reality. Jonathan concludes, why is it our national broadcaster seems so desperate to attack the one non-Israeli body which is doing the most to undermine the Hamas stranglehold over Gaza and its people? The closer the GHF and Israeli army get to finally defeating the terrorists, the more shrill the BBC's insistence that the Jewish state is deliberately starving children. That's absolutely right, by the way. This is all happening because Hamas is getting more and more desperate, and they know their only hope is to create an international pressure campaign against Israel and use their people and their people's suffering as pawns. It's sick. They have trouble believing a self-declared Islamic jihadist dictatorship might have designed this level of suffering and torture, but none in believing the Jewish democratic states did so. And let's not forget the BBC is publicly funded and legally obligated to remain impartial. This leaked email suggests that it's failing in that duty. As ever, there is virtually no chance the organisation will admit, redress, or be penalised for this failing. They never are. Now, Honest Reporting also went through some of the recent BBC coverage to elaborate a bit more on this. Jeremy Bowen, their correspondent in Israel, his latest analysis for BBC News is exactly what you'd expect: bias, omissions, and inflammatory framing dressed up as journalism. Let's break down how the BBC international editor pushes his latest smears against Israel. Bowen writes that the ICJ alleges Israel is committing genocide. Wrong. South Africa made the accusation. The court hasn't ruled. There's a difference between a legal claim and a legal judgment, and Bowen blurs that line. Carelessness or deliberate. Bowen vaguely says a ceasefire is looking more possible. Here's what he doesn't say. Israel has already accepted a ceasefire deal, making major concessions to bring the hostages home. Hamas said no, but facts like that ruin the narrative, don't they? He blames Israel for barring foreign press from Gaza. Let's be clear, there's never been free reporting under Hamas. The US imposed similar press bans in Iraq and Afghanistan. And those 200 dead Palestinian journalists? Check how many were on Hamas's payroll. Then comes the accusation he really wants to make. Israel has committed war crimes. He claims starvation, but ignores Hamas looting aid and the UN refusing to distribute it. He cites destruction, but admits that Hamas deliberately embedded itself in civilian areas. Bowen doesn't analyse, he frames. Not facts, but selective outrage. Not journalism, but spin. When this is what passes for reporting, it's no surprise that trust in the BBC has collapsed. It really has collapsed, and they're really seen as this great institution that can do no wrong. But actually, they are complicit in the anti-Israel campaign, and they have some serious, serious questions to answer. Before we finish, I just want to share with you something really important. We are told that Israel's actions are the cause of the Israeli-Arab conflict, but we've just released a groundbreaking documentary proving that Arab Islamic Jew hatred far predates Israel's re-establishment. This is a critical fact that everyone needs to learn about. Have a watch of our trailer for our new JTV Plus documentary entitled Arab Anti-Semitism Before Israel's Re-Establishment. Picture yourself, it's 1834 and you're a Jew living in Tzfat, which is a northern city in Israel, then under the Ottoman Empire. Your family is part of this ancient city's spiritual heart for generations. You study Torah, you trade in the market, and live quietly among your Arab neighbours. But one day, a mob storms your street, shouting, "Kill the Jews!" Your home is looted, your synagogue burned, your loved ones beaten. This isn't about Israel. Israel won't exist for 114 years. This isn't about settlements, the IDF, or the 1948 displacements. This is raw, violent hatred aimed at you for being a Jew. And it's not just in Palestine, it's part of a centuries-old story of anti-Semitism woven into Arab and Islamic history, from the dawn of Islam to the streets of Hebron. The claim that this conflict began with Israel's creation, the Nakba, or modern policies is a farce, a distortion that collapses under history's magnifying glass. Welcome to JTV Plus. I'm Ollie Annisfeld, and today we're uncovering a history too often buried, the relentless anti-Semitism among Arabs in Palestine before 1948, rooted in a broader Arab and Muslim hostility that began with Islam's inception in the 7th century. To watch this JTV Plus documentary and access much more premium content, click on the link in the video description.